Okay, so here we are on step 8, working on writing evaluations of arguments, evaluations that don't use jargon, that would be understandable by any reasonably intelligent person. That means we have to avoid terms that only someone who has taken this class would understand. We can use the ideas of acceptability, relevance, and sufficiency, but not the terms themselves. Now, I think for step 8, pre-writing is always a crucial step, even though sometimes my pre-writing is really quite similar to my evaluation because I like to pre-write almost in complete sentences. Pre-writing looks different for everyone. You may want to make bullet points. You might want to make a list of strengths and weaknesses. Some people do diagram the argument to find certain weaknesses, to find certain strengths, to really understand the structure of the argument. So any kind of pre-writing is fine. When I evaluate step 8s, I don't look at the pre-writing. So you'll see me do some pre-writing here and then I'll delete it and just leave the evaluation. But it's very few of us can just start writing an evaluation and come up with something that's coherent. We need to think about what point we're going to make, what kind of reasons we're going to use. Because keep in mind that an evaluation is itself an argument. It has a conclusion that's a judgment of the argument that we're talking about, and then it gives reasons to try to persuade the reader of my evaluation that my evaluation is justified, is insightful, and that they should share it. Another way to think about step 8 is as movie reviews. So when you read a movie review, the reviewer makes a judgment about the movie and then tries to give reasons to back up that judgment. You also need to make a judgment on the argument. You're trying to determine if this argument is persuasive. Okay, so here's example number 7, and let's just start with some pre-writing. Okay, so the author is trying to reassure people who love books that the move to digital reading may not be all that bad. Again, in my pre-writing, I can be very sort of conversational. I can be very informal. I don't worry too much about mistakes that I'm making. But I'm reminding myself of what the author is trying to do. And the author is correct about literacy. Literacy is not about the ability to read certain kinds of texts, but it's about the ability to read in general. So you can be quite literate even if all the texts you've read have been on an e-reader. So I'm just pointing out that, reminding myself to make the point that the author is right about literacy. But I remember when I was doing, maybe back in step 5, that I didn't think the author was right about the effects of physical books. It doesn't seem right, though, that the move to digital reading will improve the quality of physical books. Why would a culture invest time and energy into materials that are anachronistic? So there are 2 main strands of the argument. One that works, literacy, and one that doesn't, quality of physical books. So now I need to think about sufficiency. So 2 main strands of the argument, one works, one doesn't. Is the one that's left enough? Does the fact that literacy would not necessarily be negatively impacted by the move to digital reading, is that enough to reassure book lovers? And I'm going to argue, I think, now that I'm thinking about it, that it ought to be. Because literacy should matter more to book lovers than the quality of physical books. I mean, literacy is about being able to engage in a deep and interesting way with the writing of other people, and in fact, your own writing. And that has to do with living a fuller life. You know, whether books are gorgeous or not, I don't think it matters as much in terms of, for lack of a better word, human flourishing. You know, what objects get the culture's attention shifts all the time. You know, we no longer make, I don't know, what do we no longer make? Fabergé eggs, or if we do, we shouldn't. I mean, they don't matter very much in our culture, and we have more important things to spend our time and resources on. So I'm going to argue that literacy should matter more to book lovers than the quality of books, which means that the argument is persuasive despite a pretty serious flaw. Okay, so I've thought through some of the strengths and the weaknesses of the argument, and now I'm ready to start writing my evaluation. This argument ultimately succeeds in convincing me that the move to digital reading need not be entirely negative. However, it succeeds primarily through one main strand. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like the way actually. However, it succeeds despite having a fairly serious flaw. That flaw is to be found in its claim that a culture that moves toward digital reading may care more than it does now about the physical quality of books. This seems counterintuitive, if not just false. Why would a culture devote precious resources to improving a medium that is not widely used? It seems more likely that such a culture would improve the quality of e-readers, making them more beautiful and longer lasting. Yet the author does not rely solely on this dubious claim. I can't remember if the author's a male or female. I can't remember if I know that. It's a male, so. He also argues that literacy would not be harmed by the move toward digital reading. And on this point, he is on more solid ground. Not only does he seem correct, for literacy is not about the ability to read a certain kind of text, but texts in general. But this point seems more important than the point about the physical quality of books. Well, that's not quite right. The quality of physical books. Literacy is an important element of human flourishing, and the degree to which a culture nurtures literacy among its members is a good indication of its success. It's a far better indication of that culture's success than the quality of any specific physical artifact. And people who love books should care more about literacy than the quality of physical books. Therefore, the fact that the author is persuasive on this point outweighs the other flaws in the argument. Okay, so now let's double check. Have I made a claim about the argument? Have I judged it? And yes, I've said that this argument ultimately succeeds in convincing me of the point. Have I provided evidence for that claim? Yeah, I've said where it has flaws, and I've described those flaws. I've backed up my claim that those are flaws, and I've also backed up my claim that it has some important strengths. And most importantly, and this is the part that I think is easy to forget in doing step 8, I've compared the strengths to the flaws, and I've talked about which ones matter more and why. Don't forget to do that. You can't just list the strengths and the weaknesses and then say, therefore it's persuasive. I said, well, you just told me all ways in which it's flawed. Why are the ways in which it's good more important than the ways in which it's flawed? So I've done that here when I say this point seems more important than the point about the quality of physical books. Okay? So I've done that. Let me check my pre-writing to see if there's any points in my pre-writing that didn't make it into the evaluation. Correct about literacy. Notice that in my evaluation I actually changed the order of the ideas. I thought it was better to lead with the flaw but then come back to literacy. Right. Yep. So I've talked about how the author's correct about literacy, wrong about physical books, but that literacy should matter more. So I've covered my pre-writing, so I'm going to delete that, and I'm left with an evaluation, a clear evaluation that doesn't use any jargon, but that explains my judgment of this argument. So I think that's a good step 8.